Hello, everyone, and welcome. I am so excited to see you here. I am Gwydion Sullivan. I'm Penn Faulkner's Executive Director. I want to thank so many people for making tonight's event possible, from our Penn Faulkner staff, Sarah Silverman, and she deserves a round of applause. All the terrific writers we're going to be hearing from in various ways tonight, and also to our partners here at American University. It absolutely takes a community of people to produce a ceremony like this. So I'm really grateful, especially this time of year. I want to talk about that community for just 1 minute, if I can. We are living in a world with so many distractions, right? You get the beeps and boops and buzzes on your phones. You've got endless Instagram reels to scroll through. You never get to the end for some reason. Netflix shows to stream, et cetera, et cetera. But we all chose to be here in this room with each other for this golden hour to listen to and to contemplate fiction. And I think that's important, because fiction isn't a distraction. It's the real deal. It's the real reason that we gather here and give our lives meaning. Especially on a cold night like this, to gather around the fire of that inspiration, it's really precious. And I'm grateful to you all for getting out of your houses, coming through the snow and the cold, and showing up here to create a community tonight. So thank you, all of you, for being here. Tonight, we are honoring David Means, and we have a spectacular program, which you should have gathered as you came in here tonight. You'll have the printed version, but just so you know what's going to happen, we're going to hear from David in a bit. He's going to do a reading. Then we're going to enjoy what I know will be a crackling conversation between David and Tope Falarin, an award-winning novelist and a member of the Penn Faulkner Board himself. And at the end of that conversation, we'll all have a short chance to ask questions. I know you're going to be full of them as it's going along, so hold them, and then you'll get to let them out. And then we'll have the privilege of being joined by Jana Malamud Smith, which is, you might have heard Malamud in there, but every year she graces our ceremony with a bit of brilliance, and I'm grateful to you, Jana, for making it down here. Thank you. And finally, we'll hear a few remarks from David himself, and then Catherine Boone, the president of the Penn Faulkner Board, will close us out. So with that, I am delighted to welcome to the podium Rhonda Zimlick, who is a novelist herself, and her debut novel is called Raising Panic, and she's also the director of the MFA in Creative Writing program here at American. Thank you and welcome, Rhonda.
Thank you, Gwydion. Thank you, everybody, for coming out on this, well, not really blustery. We had about an inch of snow, maybe an inch and a half, just enough to make it pretty, right? I'm so honored to be here. So honored to participate in this. On behalf of the MFA in Creative Writing program at American University and the Penn Faulkner Foundation, welcome to the Penn Malamud Award for Excellence in the Short Story Ceremony, a wonderful and highly esteemed literary prize. I'm Rhonda Zimlick. As Gwydion mentioned, I'm the director of the MFA in Creative Writing program here at American University. Penn and American University share a vibrant community of writers, readers, and literary enthusiasts. It's an honor to host this distinguished program, named in tribute to the acclaimed author Bernard Malamud, one of the most important American fiction writers of the 20th century, and a central figure in post-war Jewish American literature. Bernard Malamud's contributions to the world of literature continue to impact the cultural landscape, Second to his written contributions, the award named in his honor, the pen Malamud, is why we are here tonight. And I think that's really important to take in and to acknowledge. And it is truly an honor to welcome a writer whose dedication to the craft of short story has shaped the contemporary short story form and inspired readers and writers alike. David Means is widely regarded as one of the most accomplished short story writers in contemporary American literature, a writer who reminds us again and again how much power, mystery, emotional force can exist within just a few pages. For more than 3 decades, he has approached the short story as a demanding and powerfully rewarding art form in its own right. David brings to his fiction a remarkable sense of place and atmosphere. His stories lead us through landscapes of the American Midwest and Northeast, along riverbanks, highways, in diners, and in small towns. Yet what he maps with greatest precision is the interiority of his characters, the spaces where memory, uncertainty, longing, and revelation collides. His prose is simultaneously lyrical and exact, capable of capturing the sudden rapture of a single moment or unfolding an entire lifetime in a single paragraph. He's a visiting associate professor of English at Vassar. His work has appeared in the New Yorker, Harper's, Granta, the Paris Review, and his many story collections, Assorted Fire Events, The Secret Goldfish, The Spot, Instructions for a Funeral, among others, have earned him major recognition, including finalist honors for the National Book Critics Circle Award and the Frank O'Connor International Short Story Award. And I'll just take a moment to mention that many of these books are for sale in the lobby. Politics and Prose is here this evening, so be sure to pick up a copy and get a little inscription when we're done. What strikes me the most about David Means' work is his unwavering belief in the short story's unique power. His narrative refuses easy answers. Instead, these invite us into the moments of tension and transformation, places where the ordinary world suddenly opens into something deeper and more mysterious. In the span of a few pages, he can deliver the richness and the weight of a novel distilled into an unforgettable experience in a short story. Please join me in welcoming David Means.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Wow. Seriously, it's an honor, and I want to first. I'm going to give more thanks after I receive the award, and I have, because there's so many people I want to thank. But I do want to thank the Penn Faulkner Foundation and for honoring me with this. And also thank you to all of you for, it really wasn't that much snow. I mean, it was just a little, but still, I appreciate it. I'm going to read, it's a cliche to say that it's hard to pick a story, because I like to say they're like my children. Each one was born at a particular time in my life and under particular circumstances and gave me trouble. But I'm basically picking a story tonight that's 20. It's less than 20 minutes, and it's called The Knocking. The Knocking. Upstairs, he stops for a moment just to let the tension build. And then he begins again, softer at first, going east to west and then east again, heading towards the Fifth Avenue side of the building, pausing to get his bearings to look out at the view I imagine, before heading west, pausing overhead to taunt me, before going back into motion for a few minutes, setting the pace with a pendulous movement, following the delineation of the apartment walls. His the same as mine, exactly the same. And then there's another pause, and I lean back and study the ceiling and hear far off the sound of knocking in his kitchen. And then eventually, maybe 5 minutes, maybe more, he comes back and begins persistent and steady, without the usual aggression, as if he'd forgotten me, set me aside, put away his desire for vengeance, offering a reprieve from the nature of his knocking. Maybe a 5-minute reprieve, more or less, because it is impossible to guess how long these silent moments might be when they open up overhead, knowing as I wait that the knocking will begin again. If not in the form of his tapping heel, then some other kind of knock. Perhaps the sound of the hammer he uses to pound nails. He's a big nail pounder. He'll hang pictures at all hours. Or the rubbery thud of his printer at work. He's a big printer, scrolling out documents in the wee hours of morning, at dusk, and at dawn. Or the thump of his mattress hitting the slats, accompanied by the wheeze of springs. The wheeze is not officially a knocking, most certainly acting as a kind of arabesque, a grace note to the mattress knocks that arrive after some easeful swaying in the bed. Other sounds, too, that might be included in the knocking family accumulate in my mind this afternoon. An entire history of loud bangs stretching back to the day I moved in 2 years ago. A cornucopia of various noises that include pot pan banging, dull plaster thud, bubble water dribble, the claw scratch twitter that continued for a week, the incessant moaning and the grief-filled swooning sound that arose intermittently and that at first had sounded human, but then, over the course of a few days, had taken a mechanistic, reproduced quality that made me certain it was a recording, a tape loop of some sort. He was that kind of knocker. He was willing to go beyond the call of duty, to find a way to make a new noise and to find a way to repeat it endlessly. He was that kind of knocker who would learn a fresh technique, a way of landing his heel on the floor, of lifting his toe and letting them rattle a board and work with a calisthenic efficiency, all bones and sinew, to transmit the sound via the uncarpeted pre-war floorboards, woody, resonant oak, enough solid, enough to withstand the harder strikes. Above all, he not only took knocking seriously, but went beyond that to a realm of pure belief in the idea that by being persistent over the long term and knocking only for the sake of knocking, in other words, blanking me, at least temporarily, out of his consciousness, and in doing so, forgetting the impulse, our first brief meeting a few years back, for starting in the first place, he took a leap of faith and increased his level of concentration, pure rapture, and in turn, his ability to sustain the knocking over the long run. By casting off that original impetus, our brief hall meeting, brushing by each other on that fall afternoon so long ago, he could hit the floor with his heel while I below heard him and knew he was doing so driven by a pure faith that went beyond retribution. I tried long ago to return the knocks, pounding the ceiling with a broom handle, getting up on a stepladder to follow the footfalls, only to find that as the one below, I was unable to fend off the knocking because to knock up is not the same as knocking down. And any sound that resides at the feet most certainly isn't the same as a sound coming upon the head. Theoretically, there is still debate about the nature of the knock in relation to the listener, of course. And one can easily postulate that a knock not heard is not a knock, but rather a sound, pure and simple, and that to qualify as an official knock, the sound must not only be heard, but it must arrive in the ears with an annoying quality. Most certainly there are gentle knocks, sweet knocks, but those usually fall in the category of soft rappings. The late night arrival, the lover to lover message through the wall, often adulterous tap. The old school salesman at the door, fuller brush, five-knuckle rap, a deep anachronism now, replaced long ago by the doorbell, of course, which in turn has been replaced by the phone ring. To the receiver of the knock, all theories, no matter how plausible and how sensible, are destroyed by the sound itself. Imaginative capacities gather around the knock. A hammer against a nail, sharp and persistent, goes on a beat too long, pounding and pounding over the course of an entire evening with metronomic precision. The rounded edge of a sap, lead in leather being slapped overhead against the against the floorboards, making a blunt, rubbery tap with leathery overtones. A piercingly sharp metallic tap, not too loud and not too soft, coming out from under the casual noise of a summer afternoon. The roar of traffic on Fifth Avenue combined with high heel taps, taxi horns, and the murmur of voices with a hauntingly pristine quality, the sharp end of a walking stick with a tin tip. A swishing sound stretching from one end of the head to the other, arriving one afternoon. Again, many of these knockings come late in the day when he knows, because he does know, that I am in my deepest state of reverie, trying to ponder what else can one do, the nature of my sadness in relation to my past action, throwing out silently, wordlessly, my theorems. Love is a blank, senseless vibration that when picked up by another soul begins to form something that feels eternal, like our marriage, and then tapers and thins and becomes wispy, barely audible. The final days in the house along the Hudson. And then finally, nothing but air, unable to move anything. The deep, persistent silence of loss. Mary gone, the kids gone. One afternoon, as I was remembering how it felt to slide my hands along Mary's hips, or the way her skin smoothed out around her belly and grew bone hard and then softer and flat until I got to the soft wetness, the sweeping sound began. Not a knocking, but simply the sound of a man upstairs cleaning his apartment in the middle of a hot New York afternoon. A clean, easy sound at first. Nothing to it, no knocking, until my attention was drawn away from my reverie, Mary, and I detected within the sound a hardness, a pressing nature, and I became aware over the course of what seemed to be an hour that the sound remained just over my head with a steadiness that went beyond the nature of the task. There was keen deliberation. He was going to sweep his way through the floor, the joist, the plaster. At some point, the sweet, even anachronistic broom swish had shifted to knock mode, not so much an actual sound, because that was simply vibrations in the air, but rather the inherent pacing and gestural qualities in the way the sound produced itself. The intent behind the gesture had at some point gone from the sweeping itself to the sound that the act made, so that it was clear to me below that what had started out as a normal cleaning routine had at some point, perhaps in response to my moaning and my occasional shouts up at the ceiling between sweeps, shifted over to knocking. In other words, at some point, his desire to sweep morphed into a desire to knock. Another example. One relatively quiet afternoon, just the dull murmur of televisions going on all sides, the occasional voice in the air shaft, my friend upstairs decided to hang a picture of some kind or to pound a nail for some other reason. Is there another reason? And he began with the occasional tap, teasingly working the point into the plaster. It was a tidy sound with something pleasant in it. The hammerhead against the nail, force being transferred to the tapered point, easing into the plaster, finding the gap where the plaster opens into a void. I listened with pleasure. Leaning back in my chair, I thought, go on, old boy, pound away, get that nail in there. Don't pause too long or you'll lose your sense of the task. Hold the hammer low and let it swing lightly to avoid pressure on the inside of the wrist. Get into a pure state if you can, and let the head fall in accordance with the demand of the nail itself. If need be, go back to those long afternoons in the house up in Westchester, when you were neatly tied up in your matrimonial vows and waiting to see what the next project might bring in the way of quietude. Some afternoon, cutting into a board, feeling your way around a broken water valve in a dark recess. Let the pounding become one with your own sense of needing to get something done physically, to see some effort transposed from thumb to forefinger, so to speak, smoothing down freshly poured concrete with a trowel, feeling the gelatinous shift of substance. Whatever it is, I thought, or maybe even shouted because I was prone to instructing him when necessary, and might have shouted up at the ceiling. Whatever it is you're doing, get it done swiftly and with smooth strokes and avoid catching yourself up in the task itself. I thought, or said, I think. Go to it, old boy, I'm sure I said, I think. Get into it, pound away. The age of the handy task is waning. We're in the twilight of the age of knocking, I'm sure I said. The great tradition is on the way out, I'm sure I said, I think, because he was going full bore with a terrifying, frantic effort, pinpointing the sound with a steady aesthetic perfection. He was the greatest of all knockers. He was a brilliant, virtuosic master of the form, landing thuds in what seemed to be intuitively perfect way. No intent, no human intent of any kind could find such a precise way to make the sound he made. He was at the top of his form. Each knock had my name on it. Each knock spoke directly to me. His was the work of a man on the edge of madness, a man who had lost just about everything, channeling all of his abilities into knocking. He was seeking the kind of clarity that you could get by bothering another soul down below you, never up, in his own abode, hunkering down on a hot summer afternoon in the great insular city of Manhattan, trying to put the pain of a lost marriage behind him. Mary, along with the fond memories of a time when the desire that he felt for his wife was equally matched by her desire for him, presumably. When there had been a great exchange of love between two souls, or at least what seemed to be, and he had gone about his days, puttering, fixing things, knocking about in a much less artistic manner, trying the best he could to keep the house in shape. Thank you.
Yes, yes. How about now? Lovely. Fantastic story and congratulations again. As I was preparing for this interview, I read a lot of your pieces and your interviews, and you talk so movingly about inspiration, about like the process of being inspired, about the idea as an artist of being open to experience, open to circumstance, open to a variety of things, and how that those things that you encounter might filter down over the course of years and perhaps even decades and find their way into a story. I can't help but ask now, what inspired that story that you just read?
Well, and thank you for putting up with that story. It is kind of persistent. Uh, yeah, that particular story, I mean, I did live in the city. I lived in New York. I lived on Upper West Side, and I did have a thin ceiling of thin floorboards overhead, and there was a person up there that did do a lot of like tap dancing, and I think he did have a pipe organ. I'm not kidding. He had a pipe organ in his apartment, like some kind of. So I stored that away, that seed of inspiration, and then I this story is. I really, most of my stories aren't like that. I have different modes that I write in, and I call these my riff, a riff, a kind of riff, like a jazz story where you're riffing into one thing and sort of improvising on it. So I just started writing that. um, and
There's an emotional core to it as well, right? Like you're sort of, and so I wonder how that factored in.
there is, I mean, it has the Mary, it is clearly about it. I think it's the traditional mad person narrative of somebody who's lost everything and they're just projecting that onto the knocking. I mean, Edgar Allan Poe did that with the Black Cat, where he's clearly insane as you're reading the story. I think right from the beginning of that story that he's insane, but you just keep reading anyway. So,
Sure. So you graduated from college in 1984, and your undergraduate thesis, if I have this right, was called Bullfighting in Boston and Other Poems,
yeah.
which strongly implies that you started your literary life as a poet. I'm wondering if that's the case, first of all, and then how you transitioned from being a poet to the short stories.
I did begin as a poet, and I did my MFA at Columbia in poetry, and I think I had the inclination to write narrative poetry. So I always sort of felt the inclination to write short fiction, but I had to kind of educate myself completely on how to write a short story. And back then we had printers, but I would print it out. I would cut and paste, literally cut and paste, and tape. And so I kind of had to teach myself how to try to write short fiction, but the poetry part was important.
Are you still engaging with poetry, or how did poetry shape your kind of entrance into an engagement with short fiction?
Well, I am still writing poetry, but nobody gets to see it. It sort of sits in a folder, Emily Dickinson style. Just put it in the desk. But I think I think there's always a blurry line between these genres of fiction, of poetry and fiction, especially the short story, because it is such a poetic form, and then you get the novel. But I think it was just great training on how to like look at language and listen to the music of the sound of the words when you're putting them on the page, and then pay attention to how you can whittle away at them.
Yes.
I had a poetry teacher in college who literally like ripped up one of my poems and like threw it off his porch. I was at his house, and it's like
Very dramatic.
very dramatic. But he was like, you have to pay attention to every word, every line. So
I came across this great interview you did, a brief interview in the Paris Review in 2010. I'd like to read you something you said back then, 15 years ago. You said, "I love novels, and I read them more than anything, but stories cut in sharp and hard and are able to reveal things in a different way. They're highly charged, a slightly newer form, and inherently more contemporary." I was wondering after reading that, what do you mean by the idea that short stories are more contemporary? And do
well,
you still hold that opinion? It is.
I kind of don't. I would
Yeah.
argue with that person. you say things and
Sounds good.
for one thing, it's definitely one of the oldest forms, right? I mean, the parables and then Greek mythology is relatively short arcs. But I do hold that the short story is a great tool. I think I saw an interview with Bob Dylan or somebody, and he said like, I'm a journey, I would say a journey person, like I'm a journeyman songwriter. I think Bob Dylan said. Uh, I'm a journey person writer. I like to wander from one location to the next and get in and get out as quickly as possible. And I think the story form allows you to sort of, if you invest a month in a short story and it doesn't work, then you've only used up a month of your life. And that happens a lot. If you spend 3 or 4 years writing a novel and it doesn't work, then you've just burned a lot of years of your life. So for me, the short story is a very useful like tool.
You're one of the great practitioners of the forum, which is why we're celebrating you here today. And I am wondering if you could talk about or opine about the sort of health, if you will, of the short story as a form. You've obviously dedicated your life to it, or at least a good portion of your life to it. And what I got from your reading slash performance just now was this incredible experience, hearing about this person who's contending with something that's quite irritating, and then it opens up into this other beautiful examination of emotion. It seems to me that that kind of storytelling is both accessible and quite necessary, and all of us are here because we appreciate that kind of storytelling. The broader public and agents and editors, certainly have other ideas about the short story. So how would you assess the health of the short story today?
That's a good question. I think it's healthy. Obviously, there's a lot of short story writers. And the issue is more of the health of the reader of are we going to keep the written word going? That's my concern. It's where my ballpark weird theory that I probably shouldn't say is that
Now you have to say it.
well, is that we're maybe moving away from back to a pre-literate rhetorical mode where the spoken word is overpowering the written word. I'm not sure if that's happening, but I think it's up to writers to fight that. But I also think that the short story is a fundamentally human. I probably wrote this same statement in my little speech I'm going to give at the end, but it's sort of a fundamentally human form. We basically talk and think and we go to the bar and we sit at the bar and we tell each other stories, right? And they're short. They're not too long. If they're too long, no one's going to listen to us. So I think it's a human form.
As I was reading both your stories and reading you talk about stories, I was intrigued by the way you talk about the idea of collecting stories, which itself is something of an art form. And I hadn't really thought about that before. I spent a lot of time reading short stories and thinking about short stories. And I would like to read you something. You wrote this great piece in LitHub in 2019 about the things that had recently inspired you. And among other things, you talked about Francis Bacon's studio and his work. And you wrote, I remember exiting an exhibit of his paintings at the Met, moving from his intensely distorted figures and all of that pain into the gilded halls, the old masters lined up, and feeling a disequilibrium that was inspiring. That's what a collection of stories can do. And I thought that was just such a beautiful way of sort of talking about how you're setting up a set of expectations for a reader as they make their way through a collection. You're inviting them in a way to continue moving through the book, even though they will encounter a completely different set of ideas and characters as they move along. Could you talk about the art of putting a collection together?
Yeah, I like to think that the reader's going to read the entire book from the beginning to the end. And so I do try to select stories that resonate in one way or another against each other. But it's partially because of the kind of writer that I am. I will write a story that's a more traditional realistic mode, and then I'll have something like The Knocking. And you don't want to start an album or a record album with The Knocking. You want to start with like a story that seduces them into a longer narrative. But then, so I do take care with sort of curating, and sometimes I'll hold a story that could have gone in, like, could have gone in one collection, and just I'll be like, I really don't think that fits, and I'll hold it with the hope that maybe I'll write another book at some point. But I don't think everybody does that, and I don't think all readers like read a short story collection with that in mind. But that's the way I do it.
Yeah, no, I think musicians talk about this as well. And it's like as they're putting together albums, I recall Jay-Z a few years ago talking at length about how important it is that a record is sequenced in the right way. Speaking of artists who work in other realms, I'm wondering, and not to put you on the spot, but that's why you're here. I'm wondering if you talk about something that you've seen recently that has inspired you. It's something that you're putting into that storehouse of memories and art and the rest of it. I say that I asked partly because I was so moved by that piece you wrote in 2019. And I can talk a little bit more if you're still trying to come up with something. I saw a movie, for example, I consistently watch movies, and I have this habit of watching movies the day before Thanksgiving because nobody's at the theater, and so I wander in. And so I walked into a theater like just a few days ago, and I saw that a film called Hamnet was playing, and I had no desire to see it because I've seen, I think, so many sort of versions of Hamlet over the years, and I thought this was another. And I was profoundly moved by that movie, especially the end of that movie. And I thought about the kind of wonder of kind of opening yourself up to experience and the possibility of being moved by something that you don't expect to move you. So as an artist who is constantly thinking about these kinds of things, is there something recently that you've come across that has moved you or prompted you to rethink something? Or
That's a huge question because so many things kind of it's overwhelming. Well, one thing I did do is watch that 50, 40 or whatever hour long, no, it was
Yes.
20 hours of the Revolutionary War, and the Ken Burns
Ken
documentary.
Burns, yeah.
I haven't quite processed that yet into an artistic impulse, but it got me thinking a lot about the history of the country and the violence that was there from the very. We all know the violence was there
Yeah.
from the very beginning, but this was a particular lesson in, the destruction of hate and how powerful hate is once it gets in under the surface of the culture.
Yeah.
So, I mean, a lot of my thinking has been going on around current political things, but I also wanted to say I think visual art is very connected with, in particular, the short story, because a painting has such a limitation around it with the frame, and a story. The reader is very aware that you only have a few more pages to go when you're reading a short story. It's like you're kind of like, thank God, there's only like 5 more. Or you're like, you feel it.
Yes.
And I think so with visual art, there's a lot of painters that kind of speak in a certain way to me.
Yes. Like who? Can I ask?
Well, like Richter,
Oh, I love Richter. Yes.
because he
Yeah.
paints in a realistic mode, and then he also paints in an abstract mode. Like you can do both. You can be this and that. You don't have to be stuck in your whatever it is, this sort of self-contained sense of this is all I can do.
Yeah. I'm going to ask maybe one more question and then turn to the rest of you. So please get your questions together and ready. I'm going to ask you the dreaded question, but it's a question that I have to ask. It's about AI and your sort of thinking about this. You wrote this great piece in the New York Times a couple of years ago that I thought was quite compelling, and I encourage all of you to read it. And it seems that your thesis, if I misstated, please let me know, but your thesis is basically, I'm a human and I've experienced a bunch of things and uniquely kind of experienced these things. No other human can say they've experienced them the way that I have. And when I sit down to write a story, I'm drawing on these set of unique experiences in sort of shaping a narrative. A machine can't do that, and a machine won't ever be able to do that. And I thought that was a really sort of good argument. As somebody who is working in a classroom, and obviously you're a practitioner as well, what's your relationship with, chat bots and the rest of it? How are you thinking about this right now?
Yeah, that's the piece I wrote was that chat AI can't write the cat story that I'm writing. And part of the piece was that because I haven't finished it yet. And I really had not finished the story. And I finished the story. It was in the New Yorker. It was called Chance the Cat. But at the point that I wrote the piece, I had not finished it. And literally, I think a couple of weeks ago, I went back and I thought, what did I even say when I wrote this article? And I realized that the thesis of the piece was AI can't write it. Very, very fundamental. Like it can't write it because I'm writing it. Like it was that basic. And I actually think that that's where we have to go with AI. We're going to have to go to the fundamental basic fact that it was created by, that only humans can create it because only humans can create it. Like AI can create things. It does kind of an okay job with certain things at this point, and it's mesmerizing and it's seductive, and it even like touches the parts of your brain that you respond to when you thank Siri or Alexa, like thank you for looking that up for me. Like it's already there. But I think we're going to have to almost like timestamp or find ways to um, authenticate that this is a human product, because essentially when you go to the Louvre and you look at a painting or you experience Beethoven or whatever, you're partially enjoying it because you're like, that person back then painted that or wrote that piece of music. And that's part of the human experience of engaging with art. So I think we're going to actually find ways to, it's sort of like organic food. You're going to have a label that says like 100% organic fiction.
A sticker on the book.
Pen will.
Well,
I think this is the next thing for Pen. They can put the sticker on there.
I love that. I guess I can't help but ask a follow-up, because I think something that writers have to contend with is the fact that audiences might be moved by AI art. There's a burgeoning community online of people who say we're moved by AI music, for example. And I personally don't think that chatbots are writing great short stories yet, but perhaps in 5 to 10 years that might be the case. And I'm wondering about that relationship, that crucial relationship with your reading public. And do you think they'll always be able to differentiate between the organic, as it were, fiction and fiction that's produced by a chatbot?
I don't think the average reader at some point will be able to differentiate between AI generated, and if AI says, I'm going to write the next Toni Morrison novel for you, it'll be a Song of Solomon combined with Beloved, and then I'll put in a dash of The Bluest Eye, and it comes out with a pretty amazing novel. The average reader is going to just pick it up and say, great. I think, again, it has to do with the fact, for example, that Toni Morrison, when she wrote Beloved, she rented a hotel room just down, not far from my house, right? And she holed up in this hotel room to get away from, I think, her kid. And when I read her work, I'm aware of something.
Yeah.
I'm aware of somebody who grew up in Lorain, Ohio, and who did this. So I think that, I don't know what I'm saying exactly, except it feels like it has to be part of the way we respond to art.
No, I think what you say makes so much sense. The idea that it comes from a place and a context. And the museum example is really, I think, compelling. Like you go to a museum and you say, Braque or Picasso were, sort of struggling or starving artists when they said, let's do cubism, and let's and nobody necessarily thought that would be a kind of art form that would become, so important today. But they were courageous enough at that particular point in history to kind of do something like that. And that's meaningful to see how it's beginning. Do you have something to say, or
No.
questions, comments, anything? Yes, please.
I'm curious how your teaching influences your writing.
Oh, my teaching influences my writing. Oh, no, it's, I teach at Vassar and I have these beautiful students. They're wonderful. And they really are. Like, I think it's hard work and it sometimes feels like I'm using up a lot of my creative energy. So I do complain about it. But on the other side of the coin, they're just, you do get to be with young people who basically teach you and they keep you up to date. And they don't let you falter too much. So that's the good part of teaching.
Thank you for that question. I see a hand over there.
You were talking about the relationship between the written word and can you hear me better now? Okay. You were talking about the relationship between or I think you're describing the way we're heading as being like post-literate and like the relationship between verbal spoken word versus written word. And as someone who's definitely like pro reading and writing, et cetera, written word, there's also something to be said about spoken word, of course, like you were also saying, telling stories, et cetera, audiobooks, all of that. Like, do you see that as being problematic or at odds with one another in the sense of like, one's better than the other, or, I don't know, it's getting the sense that you were sort of saying like, we need to protect this written word, and I agree, but also like, aren't they sort of part of similar things? Like, I don't know, could you just say more about that?
Yeah, I think I am defensively trying to protect the written word because, I've invested a lot in it. But I think what you're saying is correct, where the oral tradition and the pre-literate tradition, the way storytelling used to go was like the Odyssey, the Iliad, were both passed on orally by poets. I think basically we all know we're in some kind of transformative time. It's like more than, and so maybe it will be short stories will be a different form. They'll be read out loud. I don't know. But I think I was thinking more politically that we're now heading into an age when rhetorically, they can just say something over and over again. And, as long as they keep saying it, they can maybe get away with it. Whereas the Constitution is a written document. It's right down the street and it's in ink on paper. And that's the power of the written word. If you study like the Zohar, you study rabbinical text, the word itself was also the power, because only at that time, only a certain number of people could even read or write. So the word had sort of totemic magical power. So I'm just rambling, but I think you know what I'm saying.
Absolutely. Yes, yes. I wholeheartedly agree with you as well. I think we have time for one more question. Yes, okay.
Thank you so much for this conversation. My question is twofold, and it's about your own experience with writing short stories and poetry. I am very curious in a very restless way. The first part, I want to understand why that's the case. If you want to share that you are reading your short stories here with us while you are keeping your poetry in a folder, no one gets to read. Why is that? And the second part is what your advice is for younger writers navigating the same, interconnectedness, intersectionality of those two, and trying to find their voice between the two.
Yeah, I think her question was sort of about the poetry and fiction. I think a huge part, if you're a young writer or a creative person, like I think the biggest thing is to find the thing that you can do. So like, I know that sounds very simple, but so I wrote poetry and I was good at it as an undergrad, and I probably could have kept writing it, but I really felt I could do the story of, sounds horrible. I could do the story better. Like I could be a better short story writer. It was intuitive. And I think a huge part of like learning how to write or learning how to be an artist is finding the form that you want, that you're meant to work in. Like some people can get stuck in photography when maybe they should have tried painting or drawing, or maybe people who and they get locked in. So for me, I write poems you know, I look at them, I'm like, I don't even know. And even if they are good, I'm sort of like, it's not worth like the humiliation if they're not. So it's just complicated. But Thomas Hardy did write most of his great poetry after his literary career, after his novels. So then another part of me is saying, maybe that's it. Maybe when I retire and get too tired to do this or whatever, I'll start writing poetry. I don't know.
We're excited to read your poems, but so grateful for your stories. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Welcome. Thank you for coming. Some years ago, when I was writing a memoir about my father, I read through the journals he had filled as a young man as he slowly taught himself to write. Practice sentences, paragraphs, poems, plot ideas filled the pages. I think he was looking for a genre in part, but I think he was really trying to master the sentence over years. He copied quotations that felt meaningful, including the whole of John Keats's magnificent sonnet, "When I have fears that I may cease to be." If you haven't read the sonnet, it helps to know that the 22-year-old poet writes it in 1818 after his mother and brother have died of tuberculosis. His father is already more than a decade dead. Life is fragile. And indeed, Keats dies before his 26th birthday. In the poem, the young poet is pensive, filled with longing. His mind is on fire with creative ambition, and he fears dying. In his words, "Before my pen has gleaned my teeming brain." His mind is also on fire with lust, and he fears losing Fanny Braun, the young neighbor with whom he is in love, fears that he might, quote, "never have relish in the fairy power of unreflecting love." These doubts rouse despair, and he ends, "Then on the shore of the wide world I stand alone and think, till love and fame to nothingness do sink." At times, my father was almost drowned in his own despair as he worked to become a writer and also to find love. He was close to penniless. His family was in tatters. His immigrant father earned a meager living, barely. His mother had died when he was 15. His one brother was suffering from schizophrenia. I find it easy to imagine the comfort the poem offered him, the solidarity, and why he held it close. Serendipitously, many years later, but long before I found his journals, I read the sonnet in a high school English class and memorized it. I remember him asking me to recite it to him, but I didn't know why. I tell this story as a way to bring a long dead parent briefly back to life, and also because lately, some good-hearted people have been trying to save college humanity programs and bookstores by claiming that reading literature increases a reader's empathy. Thus, it seems, literature is now valuable because it has utility. Well and good if it does, but to me, claiming empathy for others as literature's justification, and I'm a retired psychotherapist and I believe in empathy. It's like claiming that we should preserve open wilderness to provide background for selfies. Let's be clear. Let's be clear. Literature's essential. All art is essential. Why claim that it's merely useful? Some of the oldest remnants of human life include cave paintings, ivory figures of pregnant women, and flutes carved from animal bones. Oral literature preceded the written word, and may live after it, but early in the 3rd millennium BCE, people in Mesopotamia wrote verse. Remember, the Epic of Gilgamesh is almost that old. We're talking about a 5,000-year run here, guys. Art evolves and shape shifts to meet its place and moment. While poetry has lost the mass of readers it once had, films and graphic novels and the occasional video game join art's ranks. Many of you in this audience know the truth better than I, but I'll say it anyway. Art is essential because the sheer beauty of a short story or of a single line of poetry can render us breathless or give us chills or make us laugh. And as with my father's experience of Keats's sonnet, offer a crucial encounter with another person, another soul. This moment of contact, of intimacy, of recognition, of terror, disgust, or delight squeezes and expands our sensibilities, leaves us energized, and leaves us less alone. We gain a cosmic companionship, and with it, perhaps, some greater empathy for ourselves and for our own nascent and mortal and impossible desires. Honoring the labor that creates this inexplicable gift is why we have the Malamud Award for short fiction, and why tonight it gives me pleasure to give it to David Means.
That was beautiful. I want to thank the Penn Faulkner Foundation and everyone who works at the Penn Malamud project. It's not a project, the award. I appreciate it. I should thank each person, but there's a lot of people, and they were so gracious and helpful along the line. Unless you've been married to a writer, or you are the child of a writer, or in a long-term relationship with one, it might be hard to understand how challenging it can be to live with someone who retreats into isolation, into a kind of reverie, sits alone for hours, sometimes missing the great events of life, trying to conjure an imagined set of instructions so that a reader can imagine a story. I want to thank my family, first of all, for putting up with my absences. Genevieve Patterson Means, my incredible wife and partner, who's been with me from the very beginning. My kids, Max and Miranda, who have always been beside me and actually celebrated my work. I don't think I would have celebrated my parents' work. And also my son-in-law, Harmon, who's also a writer and an art critic, and my beloved father-in-law, Glenn, who died a few weeks ago and was an incredibly supportive person in my life. One of those parental figures who never gave me a hard time. Even when I wanted to just be a poet, he supported that and never threw shade at me and said, you should get a real job, even though I did have to get a real job. Also, Dory, his wife, Dory, who's like a mother to me too. And my sisters in Michigan and my own parents who passed away a few years ago. I can't talk here about how I became a short story writer, but I have to mention a couple of people who inspired me. One is Dennis Johnson, who was a poetry teacher of mine and encouraged me at an important time in my life. The other is my dear friend and sometimes big brother figure, Jonathan Franzen, who has always sort of pestered me and been alongside me as I've written, and even told me one time, just keep writing stories, you'll be okay. I also have to thank Rebecca Nagel at the and Andrew Wiley at the Wiley Agency. One time I had dinner with Andrew Wiley, the agent, when I was young, and he said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to be the next Raymond Carver." And he said, "Why would you want to do that?" And I didn't know what he meant at that time, but now I understand what he's saying. You know, I won't reiterate that the short story is a great form and it's capable of going across vast landscapes, big countries with wide geographies and diversities like Russia and Australia and the United States produce abundant short story writers, because a short story can enter a landscape, it can probe a place, a situation, an identity, and then it moves on. Bernard Malamud was a great story writer, daring and innovative, an American writer, the son of Jewish immigrants, Max and Bertha, who came here and raised him. This is an aside, but I'm going to put it in here. Saul Bellows' parents, his father never became a legal, never became a legal citizen of the United States of America, but paid his taxes and loved this country. Saul Bellows' father. Saul Bellow, who won the Nobel Prize in Literature, he wasn't a citizen. I don't even know when. It was late, in his 20s, he became a citizen. I think when he started to publish, he realized, I better get my citizenship. So people come to this country, they create great art, and they create the great mix that makes us who we are. Malamud wrote a story, Angel Levine, in which he imagined a Jewish man visited by a Black angel. It was a radical, important story at its time. He was writing a kind of magic realism before that term became sort of commonplace. That story inspired John Edgar Wideman, one of our great investigators of the complex condition of being a Black man in this beautiful, sometimes terrible country, to write a recent story, a little story in one of his new books called Colored Angel Levine. So stories are also a call and response to each other over time. I'm almost done. Diane DePrima wrote us a poem called Rant that I really love. And in it, she said, without imagination, there is no memory. Without imagination, there is no sensation. Without imagination, there is no will, desire. The war that matters is the war against the imagination. All other wars are subsumed in it. William Carlos Williams wrote, "It is difficult to get the news from poems, yet people die miserably every day from a lack of what is found there." I hesitated to use the war metaphor for the current situation of the artist in this culture. And instead of weapon, I'd like to use the word tool. The short story is one particular tool in a constant fight in the struggle for the dignity of fictional characters and for living, real human characters and people. What a story says, simply by existing, is that human life can be witnessed in a precise glimpse. Sometimes I feel that if I don't tell my characters' stories, they'll be lost. And I'm aware of the vast, almost infinite stories of those who have truly lived and died in this world that will never be told. They're lost. Thank you for continuing to read and write fiction. Tonight was one of the best nights of my life, and it makes me want to go back to my little office and close the door and get back to work. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that beautiful speech, David. And I want to thank everyone again for coming tonight, for our partners at American University, Politics and Prose, the Penn Faulkner staff who made this happen, and the Means family for coming out and support tonight. I want to close by returning us back to the beginning briefly, to revisit some words that Bernard Malamud said about the short story, which are unbelievably apt tonight. I mean, the themes kept coming up tonight. It is perfect quote to end the evening on. Malamud said, "I like packing a self or two into a few pages, predicating lifetimes. The drama is terse, happens faster, and is often outlandish. A short story is a way of indicating the complexity of life in a few pages, producing the surprise and effect of a profound knowledge in a short time. There's much to say, little time to say it, something like the effect of a poem," which is a beautiful way to end the evening tonight. So thank you all so much for coming, and we hope to see you at other PEN Faulkner events soon. Thank you.